Here I have that screw grasped in a pin vise so that I can file the end of it. It won't take much to shorten that enough to make the difference. I'll see if that'll screw back in the case without any arguments. I may have to take the burrs off it, or I may not. I'll have to wait and see. No, it's going straight in, no arguments. That's it. It's below the surface now, so that won't scuff on anything. It's nice and tight, so it's not going to wriggle its way loose. And it means that that particular potential problem has been headed off at the pass. That's the case dealt with. Let's have a look at this. Here's our settings lever. Bit of grease and oil on there. Just looking at the state of that, that looks okay. And where's that going to be on the case? At the bottom, yes, that way up. Alright. Now this piece, this is our moving plate. Yeah, that's very grimy, that's going to need a bit of cleaning. I'll put that down on a piece of paper and clean it. A little bit of oxidation or something on that surface. I would say it indicates a drop of moisture has got in there at some stage, but this is generally in pretty good order. Let's hold this down here. Yeah, that's good. You can see there's virtually nothing coming off there, so you know that cleaned up very quickly. Now one side of this, the holes are slightly countersunk. They go inwards to the inside of the shutter. And our settings lever, just going to give that a wipe with some molybdenum paste, because you get a bit of friction between this and the case. You can probably see the brass is rubbed through there. Now this is going to go up this way, I believe. I support that with my finger from underneath. The camera's probably not going to focus now. And get one of my shoulder screws in place. My tweezers are got something on them. I don't know whether it's, yes, There's something is sticky on my tweezers. It might be grease. It might be adhesive. Okay, that's one in place. I'll support this from underneath on the wooden block. Get the second screw in place. Tighten both screws, supporting them from underneath. Right, so right, that's a nice smooth action. It's not loose. It shouldn't be loose. If it was loose, it's too easy to accidentally knock your aperture settings. So it doesn't want to be loose, it wants to be smooth in its action. And any resistance should be here, between this lever and the case. Not in the diaphragm blades because they're oily and sticky. Let's have a look at those. Well, the blades will normally come out as a rosette, but these are stuck together. They're stuck with oil, quite a bit of oil. So I'll carefully separate those. These aren't bad. Sometimes they're so stuck that you're in danger of damaging them just trying to get them to part company. Well, it's all of these I'll have to clean individually. And the retaining plate, that doesn't look too bad, strangely enough. Let's clean that. Now, one side of the retainer plate has slight dimples in it, which I think line up with the pivots for the shutter blades. And the flat plain side goes towards the diaphragm blades. That side there goes towards the diaphragm blades when we assemble it. At first I've just got to do these blades. These are all done in the same manner. These aren't symmetrical either, these blades. The pivot points are closer to the corner at one end and closer to the centre of the blade at the other, although that's not always easy to see. That's certainly the case, and if you take the time to have a look you'll see it. And you need to take great note of that, because if you don't, you won't end up with a nice circular opening. And if you do, if you get them all aligned the same way with each other, but the wrong way, your aperture settings won't be what you'd set. They'll be something slightly different. Okay, so that blade looks good, and all I've got to do is clean all of these blades and then reassemble the diaphragm. So I won't watch you make me clean 10 blades, it's very boring. I'll start assembling the diaphragm now. Got all the blades laid out. That blade's unusual, there's a tiny corner missing off that blade. It doesn't look like a later loss, it must have been made like that. Oh, there's just a thread of cotton hanging onto that blade where I've been cleaning it. Now I'm putting these blades in. The rivets on the blades closest to the centre line of the blade are the ones I'm putting into the retainer plate here. The rivets closest to the outside edge of the blade are the ones that are pointing upwards, the ones I'm holding with my tweezers to get the blades in place. Not sure if I've got that blade seated or not. Yeah, it looks like I have. Okay, so now I've got to peel back the earlier blades, the ones I first put in place, so I can get the next one in position. As you can see, I'm using a toothpick to help me place these. Two blades to go. Last one. Now I've got to lift these blades over the back, over the top without disturbing anything, or lifting them out of their pivot holes. Get them all seated in neatly around my jig. Then I've got to get the case back over them. Those whole pins that are sticking up have to fall into these slots here. I've got to take note of where these three mounting holes are relative to the screw holes in the case. So I know it goes that way up. I'm just looking at the alignment there and lining up those rivets. See if I can seat that over those rivets. You can hear them click into place. That's usually a sign of success. I'll flip my jig over, lift the outside piece off, see if I've got everything aligned correctly. Yeah, the three screw holes are visible. If I get these three screws in, I'll do them up very lightly. Just in case one of the blades isn't seated, that its pivots are not seated correctly in the moving plate. I don't want to damage the blade. If I do these screws up very lightly, then that's less likely to happen. Once I've checked that the blades are all correctly positioned, that the diaphragm opens and closes smoothly, I'll be able to tighten this 3 screws up. Alright, so looking at this, first thing I'm looking for are my 10 pins. Make sure all of those top ones are in their correct positions, and they are. Of course I can't really see what's happening underneath with the slots, so I'll try moving the plate, and I can see I've immediately got a problem. I've got this in the wrong position, so that where it should close the blades down, it's already at the end of its travel. I've put that in the wrong way round. Okay, oh well, worst things happen at sea. I'll just have to reverse my work. If I'm very lucky, I'll be able to recover from this little hiccup without having to tediously put all the blades back in position. Lift that off, swing that to the other end of its arc, have a look at the mounting holes, check where everything is, make sure I've got line of sight with one of the rivets. See if that'll click into place. Sounds hopeful. Let's try again. Because there's so many opportunities for things to go wrong when you're getting these diaphragms together, because the blades are very small and light and easily displaced, it's not uncommon to have 2 or more goes at getting a diaphragm together correctly. You get frustrating if you've had 5 or 6 attempts and it still doesn't go right, but you get there. It's only a matter of time. Okay, so again, I'm checking to see that I've got 10 pins in 10 sockets. They're all looking good. And I'll check that when I move the lever, all the blades are moving, and they're moving smoothly throughout their range. And that looks good. So I can tighten my 3 screws up. So all I lost there was a couple of minutes of time lifting that plate, the cover off and back on again. And looking at those blades, there's still speckles and marks on them. There are still obvious fingerprints here on that moving plate, and they're not mine. They're etched into the surface. That's from someone having picked it up a long time ago now. Could have been any time. Okay, so there's our shutter case. I'll just check those 3 screws again. I'm pretty sure I've done them all. That's good. I'm going to put the case aside. Look at my mechanism plate. Now I'm looking to see how this has been put together. That should have been the first blade, but the first blade's been placed over here. Okay, That tells me that most likely the shutter has been serviced before and someone didn't follow the conventions. Is that important? No, probably not. By convention, your first blade would be in this position. Okay, so that's the blades off. I'm going to unhook that spring. Remove this screw. This holds the lever in place. The lever swings the blade actuating ring backwards or forwards to open or close the blades. The retainer ring here has 3 screws, which may or may not be all the same length. That was a short one. That was a short one. That was a short one. So they're all the same length, and none of those screws were especially tight. They weren't falling out, but they weren't a struggle to get out. Here's our retainer plate, and there's the blade actuating ring. That's the bit that swings the blades in and out. Here's our mechanism plate. It looks quite clean and tidy. And our retard gear train. That moves quite well. So this I just need to clean with naphtha to remove all that traces of old grease and dust and dirt out, both faces, and then I'll want to flush this retard gear train. Typically I don't remove them from the shutter to clean them because they don't require it typically, and if you do remove them, it is a bother and a nuisance getting the timing right later. Not impossible, and if you have a special need to remove them to clean them, if the retard gear train is particularly gummy and you want to put it in the ultrasonic cleaner, then you have to remove it, but otherwise don't. This one, as I say, appears to work quite well. Now when you're cleaning around here, around the retard gear train, there's a big coil spring here, a hairspring. If you hold back the pallet, swing this arm all the way across, drop the pallets back in, that hairspring is wound up tight and it's out of the way. It means that you can run a cotton bud round there now without fear of damaging it. So you can clean round inside here. That's important because if you damage that spring, the retard gear train won't work properly. Okay, so I'll just swab around this side of the mechanism plate. This is where the blade actuating ring runs. And here I'm taking pains to get rid of any old grease or anything of that nature, because it'll have likely dried out, gone sticky, and be inclined to cause problems. Also, old grease typically has a freight of dust that it's collected up over time. So here I'm just poured some naphtha onto that speed train, and I'm working that repeatedly. That'll flush any oil or contaminants off the surfaces. And that action is noticeably freer than it was previously. Not that it had a real problem, but now it runs smoother, quicker, less resistance. That's the mechanism plate. What about the retainer plate? There's a little bit of colour coming off here. It's probably oil. Maybe a bit of dust. Always handle pieces like this right from the edges. You don't want to be clamping this between finger and thumb, because you'll just add to the collection of offending fingerprints, which don't do any of these things any good. Now here, that plate there, you can see the black. Yeah, you can. See this? That's paint. That's paint from when this centerpiece here has been either originally painted or touched up at a later date. I want that off because that shouldn't be on that surface, and it may well interfere with the free running of the blade actuating ring. So I'll just clean that off with some acetone, I think. Yes, well, acetone saw the back of that, so that little problem's gone. That just leaves me with the blade actuating ring itself to clean. And a little bit of naphtha will be plenty for dealing with this. The blade actuating ring, sometimes you'll see this lubricated with graphite grease, in fact reasonably commonly. Other times it's been lubricated with dry graphite. I tend to use graphite powder. You can just use pencil lead. You've got a soft lead pencil, you can run that over the surfaces, it'll do exactly the same job. Since I'm going to lubricate the retard gear train with graphite powder, it makes sense for me to do the lot all at one time pretty much. So this only goes on in one position, and this only goes on in one position, and it has the locating rivet which drops into a hole in the case. Put the 3 screws back. If the screws are different lengths, you need to take great note of where the longer screw came from. Sometimes the position where the screws come out will foul something up on the other side of the mechanism if the screws are too long. Later shutters tend to have a longer screw in this position. Alright, those 3 are in place. I'll just tighten them up. I'll check the action. Oh yeah, that's nice and free. That's good. So the little lever that works it and that the screw, I'll clean those. Particularly under places like that little lever, if it's got some old grease or anything on there, that can be quite sticky and it can, prevent things from moving at speed. In some parts you need to move at speed. So I typically just run molybdenum paste on a toothpick through the pivot hole and through the little slotted hole that connects up to the blade actuating ring pin. Put that screw back in place. Tighten the screw and put its spring back in place. Right. Head action's nice and snappy. And I'll lubricate the blade actuating ring here and my retard gear train with graphite powder.